Yeah, 36.7
Okay, great.
Celsius, obviously.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. 네, 여보세요? Oh, wait. Sorry, continue. 네, 여보세요? 네네.
We're here today to continue the conversation on the coronavirus and hope that we can keep tabs on the situation happening globally. I'm joined here today with a former colleague of mine, and she is across the globe in South Korea. She recently returned from Europe a week ago and is in quarantine in her home in South Korea and wants to share a little about her experiences. Definitely a good opportunity for us to learn from one another globally, and I hope you'll learn something with me today. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Heiwon.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
You were in France, in Spain. Were you in just a month ago?
I was indeed in Spain about a month ago visiting my friend and came back to Paris, where normally I live. With all the confinement measures and everything considered, I decided to come back to Seoul, where my family lives.
Yeah.
So here I am.
When did it get to a point where you decided I need to take action and I need to go home? Was there something in the news that kind of stuck out to you, and you basically decided to just come straight home to South Korea?
So in the beginning, I thought I would stick it out, however long that might be.
Right.
But once the confinement measures came into place, which was about 2, 3 weeks ago, it was pretty rough. I saw what was happening, people don't have hospital beds or even on the floor. You see that happening in Italy, Spain, and it looked like it was going to happen in France as well. So that was not really reassuring. And just, I don't know, mentally, this strict confinement was very difficult for me. So
So that was like all of a sudden it kind of just came, and the policies came after they decided to up their testing and the numbers increased. Was that just all of a sudden that you saw a lot of these policies in
well,
place?
the government said, okay, we need to go into self-confinement, but people were not following it. So then after 2 days or so, they put up a stricter confinement.
How does that differ with your home country? I mean, you went back to Korea about a week ago, and what did you see the difference there?
I think things were more transparent. I think the government was taking it more seriously, probably because we went through SARS and MERS, and the public was obviously more conscious of it. For about 2, maybe even 3 months, we've been in that emergency mode. Whereas France, after having seen hundreds of people die in Italy and Spain, I think that's when people kind of started taking it seriously, because even up until like 3, 4 weeks ago, like the government was saying, well, it's going to be okay, so the whole society didn't really take it seriously.
It's definitely interesting to see how different countries react to this situation. In some ways, we look at countries like Taiwan and South Korea as kind of role models in all of this. I don't know if you have any thoughts of what things we perhaps didn't handle very well in our own approach in the US.
The biggest difference that I see between the US and Korea is that in the US, I don't see a system in place, whereas in Korea, everything seems to, you know, function properly. There is a system in place. It's not just one person taking over. Although I think we see quite some strong leadership of what is the equivalent of CDC in Korea. I see transparency. It's more science and medicine led, whereas I think in the US it's quite politicized.
I mean, you talked a little bit about South Korea's preventative policies, and now the policies are continuing to flatten the curve as we see in that country. Can you talk about some of the things that you've experienced just with the government and how they've taken care of you as a citizen?
I think starting on the 22nd of March, everyone coming from the US and Europe have to go into self-confinement for 2 weeks. On the plane, you have to fill in certain forms about where you were the past 21 days, if you had any of these symptoms, and then another form for another institute about your symptoms for the past 2 weeks. And then, so based on that, they go through some other measures for me because I have seasonal allergy. I had to go to another booth, and then they asked me some follow-up questions, check my temperature, all of that. I didn't have like high fever, so I passed. If I did have high fever, I think I would have had to get tested on the spot. So I went back home after having, I guess, agreed to the form that I will be in quarantine for 2 weeks. My mom picked me up. We obviously didn't hug. We had a mask. Within 3 days, I had to go to the local health center where I got tested, and I got tested negative. And simultaneously, I got phone calls from the government, and they check on me twice a day, asking my temperature, if I have any symptoms and whatnot, if I have any questions or comments. Oh yeah, also at the airport, we had to download this mobile application where you have to, do the same thing, write your temperature if you have any symptoms or anything you want to communicate. So yeah, I have to do a daily update twice a day.
And that goes directly to the government?
Yeah, it's a government app.
Okay.
Yeah, I also received a quarantine kit. I thought it'd be a tiny little pouch with maybe a thermometer, but it turned out to be a really big box full of food, water, like obviously masks, but also I was quite surprised by the medical waste trash bag.
Can you explain that for the people that are not familiar with the medical waste trash bags?
Okay, well, first of all, in Korea we have a bit more strict recycling system, so every district has different types of, so if you have food waste, you have a particular bag that you have to buy. If you have a normal waste, you have to buy that, and then if you have recyclables, you recycle, whatnot. But here, because I could have COVID-19, any waste that I produce must go into this medical waste treatment where they will, I guess, treat it differently compared to normal trash that people produce. It's this gigantic orange bag with this symbol of medical waste.
You were coming back on a flight back to South Korea. When you got off the airplane, what was that scenario like? Was it very orderly? Was there a lot of panic? Was there a lot of, or was, what did that experience, was that like for you?
Immediately we saw that we had to line up. It was already a long line, so lined up and people were like, okay. And then this person was saying we have to download this application, so it was more like, okay, and everyone just trying to download and solve the technical issues. So it was,
So
I don't know,
everybody
kind of
had to
pretty
go through that process. There was no exception.
no.
Yeah, I think the reason why I'm asking is because airports are having different policies in terms of the way that they're able to take in these individuals and, telling them to self-quarantine and those kind of things. And there's a lot of policies that people were not following at the airports. I think that's something that I see in East Asian countries specifically, that when this thing, began spreading so rapidly, that was almost the first approach, was more strict policies at the airports, ensuring that every person coming in was held accountable and responsible for what they were doing. So definitely in your own experience, that seems like it was the case, that there was no exception and that everybody was to go through the screening process, and it was quite tight, and there was a very dedicated procedure for all of that.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably because you went through MERS recently and obviously SARS about like 20 years ago. And with MERS, I think something, almost around 40 people died, and people were quite outraged from what I remember.
Yeah.
So that's why we had an update in policies that led to the digital geolocalization of people that we often hear about on the news. Okay, well, I need to take my temperature because the district health center calls me at around 10 normally.
So you actually get called from the center at a specific time every day to take your temperature.
The mobile application also reminds me, but yes. So yeah, there's this disposable thermometer. It's almost like paper-based, I guess.
That's amazing. I mean, that they're giving you all these kits and it's almost in a timed fashion. They're calling you, the government is. And actually, I'd love for you to just after you take your temperature, I'll let you kind of take care of, you'll be doing a live temperature reading of yourself right now.
Yeah, you have to have it in for a minute, so. But apparently it's made in the USA, it says.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think what I was saying, there is a different culture in the United States, and from where I'm from in the Midwest, certainly there's a lot of challenges with information. A lot of the challenges specifically with, the way that we might feel connected with the rest of the world. I think we are in some ways more disconnected, not only with the world, but, even the rest of this nation. And oftentimes we feel the most disconnected when it comes to severe issues like this. Just so that you're aware, I mean, I think we were very proud of kind of the state approach, Ohio specifically, and the governor's approach, taking this issue extremely seriously. Hopefully you're good.
Yeah, 36.7.
Okay, great.
Celsius, obviously.
Yeah. That's kind of why I wanted to chat with you a little bit, to help us be more connected with the world and to share those experiences with those people that are experiencing vastly different things in vastly different systems. There are very strict kind of stay-at-home policies in place right now. Restaurants are closed. Even in some parts of the United States, parks are being closed down because people are not respecting social distancing. They're not really taking it seriously, and not respecting the.
Oh, sorry. 네, 여보세요? Oh, wait. Sorry, that's it. 네, 여보세요? 네네.
Heiwon actually just stepped out because she just received a call from the government to measure her temperature.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah, it's pretty quick because he calls twice a day, so.
Twice a day.
Nothing. Yeah, nothing's changing. So he just says, "What's your temperature?" And tell him the temperature.
Yeah, that to me is crazy that you have someone from the government that's checking up on you every day and, keeping tabs on your health and things like that. That's certainly not something that you would see stateside.
We're a centralized country, as I've mentioned. So the national government came up with the policy how to deal with people who might be importing cases, because obviously the epidemic centers are Europe and US at the moment. And so that's why for the people entering in from the 22nd of March, we all had to agree. So if you don't agree, then you can't come to the country, which is understandable because things are quite controlled in Korea, whereas, we are the potential risks. So in order to protect the public safety.
And can you talk more about the level of transparency for the government and the culture that you mentioned? I think the challenges of a diverse set of cultures in the United States, but what is the culture like in Korea? You're saying that people are willing to essentially give up their own privacy because in some ways there's transparency in their government.
No, I think it's specifically in this case, for COVID-19, it's directly because of MERS, because we saw that transparency was an issue. And that's why we have a policy specifically for infectious diseases.
Yeah, and I think talking about the culture aspect of things, there's been a lot of stigma specific to wearing masks. And I know that, I myself coming from Taiwan, knowing that in a lot of the East Asian countries, because we've dealt with SARS and MERS before, there isn't the same stigma to do with wearing masks. What is it like in Korea? Do everybody wear masks? Is that kind of a well expected thing for everyone to be in the community and wearing masks?
With air pollution, wearing a mask is a natural thing for people to do these days. There's obviously no judgment, and everyone does it. So because everyone does it, it's normal.
In the United States, even without that kind of initial, policy in place to really save the masks for the frontline healthcare professionals, there is certainly a stigma for anybody to be walking in the streets wearing a mask. Whereas if you go to South Korea or Japan or China or Taiwan, that stigma doesn't exist. And in fact, I myself walking in a store, people will judge me first of all because I'm Asian and I'm wearing a mask. So they think that either I'm deathly ill or there's something wrong with me.
Obviously, I haven't been outside, out on the streets, but from what I've heard, if you don't wear a mask, then people would judge you, and there's the social pressure to wear a mask, obviously to protect yourself, but quite importantly to protect others, because as we have seen, particularly with COVID-19, the asymptomatic patients spread the disease. So, this is not a normal political question where there might be multiple ways. I think when it comes to infectious diseases, there just are, it is what it is. Maybe you might have a few different approaches, but I think the options are limited, and you don't necessarily have, it's like, oh, I think we should be like this.
Well,
It's
I
like,
love that.
well,
I love that you
that's
say that the options are limited, and in terms of the policies and the measures, I love when you say that because I think there's so much debate here, and there's a lot of politics, in the space that I think when it comes down to what can we do as a government to save lives, I think that's where
right.
you see Korea, Taiwan, Singapore step up and say, hey, there are very specific, unquestionable, undoubtable policies that we can all adopt as a country, as one people to ensure the safety of the public. And, I think in America, again, it's a different government system here. I mean, it's very different in terms of statewide powers and federal powers. But certainly those are things that I think are tangible things that we can learn from different communities, at least learn from their approach when it comes to infectious diseases and pandemics. What ways that we can really improve in terms of our cultural and social approach to this issue, because a lot of it relies in the American public. At the end of the day, a lot of it relies in our response, and if we're more educated, if we're more aware, then I think we'll also take the steps to ensure that these kind of policies are in place at an earlier time. So I love that when you say there's limited options when it comes to these kind of problems and ways that we can have policies towards that.
Right. I guess we're all learning, but the learning better happen
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
because lives are at risk, and it's not like other policies where you experiment and then see, oh, does the income rise or does it not rise? We're like, okay, well, based on your decision, people might die.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um,
Today we talked about a little bit about Korea's policies in place and also your personal experience. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. I think there was a lot there, and hopefully we can just learn from one another, from each other's own experiences, and hope that the situation turns out for the better for both Korea and the United States. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Heiwon.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. And
well, thank you again for joining us for this conversation. I hope you learned a little bit from her story and her experience. Certainly, there's a lot for us to learn from each other. Of course, as always, stay at home, stay human, and be safe. I'll see you soon.